Welcome to the Deep Dive podcast channel.
Hey there. Ready to get into this?
Absolutely. We're tackling something I think a lot of people grapple with, maybe without even having the words for it.
Right.
You know that feeling. When a relationship starts out amazing, like real fireworks, but then slowly something starts to feel, well, off.
Yeah, that physical feeling. Maybe tightness in your chest, stomach, and knots.
Exactly. And you start second guessing yourself constantly, thinking, am I just being too sensitive here?
That feeling, that physical unease you mentioned, the material you sent over, it's so important. It could be your body, your nervous system, basically sounding an alarm.
So it might not be about being too sensitive. It could
Mhm.
be something much more subtle and damaging, like emotional manipulation.
Precisely. And that's our focus for this deep dive. We've gone through all these sources you gathered on emotional manipulation, especially in relationships.
And we really want to unpack why it's often so hard to see, especially, like the sources point out, if there's a background of trauma or childhood neglect, maybe CPTSD.
Yeah, our goal here isn't about pointing fingers. It's about clarity. We want to pull out the key red flags from the research, understand the dynamics underneath it all, like trauma bonding.
And explore the paths to healing outlined in this material. Really, it's about empowering you, the listener, with this knowledge.
Okay, so let's define this a bit more. Emotional manipulation. The sources are clear. It's usually not the loud, obvious abuse. It's quieter.
Covert, subtle, using your own emotions, your empathy, maybe your fears, your need for connection against you to control things.
Exactly. It often disguises itself as care or even intimacy. The sources had that really vivid line. They don't yell. They whisper doubts. They don't hit. They withdraw affection.
Wow, that's powerful. Psychological control wrapped up in sometimes even compliments or guilt.
Right. It's not usually one big event. It's more like
Yeah.
this slow drip, drip, drip that erodes your sense of self, your reality.
Which is so different from healthy conflict, as the sources highlight. In a good relationship, disagreement feels fundamentally safe. You can say no, set a boundary.
And it's respected. Maybe it's uncomfortable for a moment, but it doesn't fundamentally threaten the connection.
But in these manipulative dynamics described in the research, setting a boundary often triggers, well, punishment.
Yeah, punishment like sulking, the silent treatment, withdrawing affection completely. Or they flip it, making you feel guilty for even having a boundary in the first place.
Your own feelings get turned into weapons against you.
And the apologies, they feel off, don't they? The sources mention the classic, "I'm sorry you feel that way."
Ugh, yeah. Which basically says, the problem isn't my action, it's your reaction. It shifts all the blame back onto you.
Exactly. And this is where the link to past experiences, like trauma or neglect, becomes really crucial according to the material. Those histories can create blind spots.
How so? Like starting from childhood.
Well, yeah, the sources suggest if your basic needs for safety, for feeling seen and validated weren't consistently met when you were young, your internal map for what love is can get distorted.
So you might learn that love means having to work really hard to be chosen, or always walking on eggshells to keep things calm.
Precisely. The material uses this phrase, inconsistent caregiving can wire you to crave crumbs. You might mistake intensity or chaos for genuine connection because it feels familiar.
So you end up chasing that closeness, even if it comes with control or instability,
Right.
because that's what you learned love felt like.
It can be like that, yeah. Seeking the familiar, even if the familiar was painful or confusing.
And what about CPTSD? Complex PTSD from ongoing trauma.
The sources explain that CPTSD often leads to things like chronic self-doubt, being constantly on edge, hypervigilant, and finding it really hard to trust your own gut feelings, your instincts.
Which sounds like fertile ground for a manipulator.
Sadly, yes. Manipulative partners can be very adept at picking up on and exploiting that self-doubt. Those feelings of being too much or not enough that often come with CPTSD, they can use those against you.
And it's not just in your head, right? The sources talk a lot about the body's reaction.
Hugely important. Trauma impacts the nervous system, that fight, flight, freeze, or even fawn response. It gets easily triggered if you've lived through chronic stress or trauma.
So when manipulation happens, even subtly, your body might react first before your mind even figures it out.
That's exactly it. Your nervous system registers danger. The sources list physical signs. Freezing up unexpectedly, feeling panic over small things, maybe dissociating or feeling numb during intimacy.
Or just that persistent feeling of being off, that knot in your stomach, even when you can't point to a specific reason.
Right, and that feeling isn't you overreacting, the sources stress this. It's your nervous system trying to warn you. The problem is, the manipulation is often so subtle, your logical brain struggles to connect the dots.
Leading to more confusion and self-doubt. Wow.
It's a primal alarm that's hard to interpret consciously sometimes.
Okay, so let's talk about what those alarms, those red flags, actually look like in the relationship day to day. The sources outline several key ones. First up, that confusion and self-doubt we keep mentioning.
Yeah, that shift. Maybe you used to feel pretty sure of yourself, and now you're constantly second-guessing everything. Your thoughts, your feelings, your memories.
The sources captured those internal thoughts. Did I misunderstand? Maybe I am too sensitive. They probably didn't mean it like that.
And crucially, the sources call this confusion engineered. It's often a tactic, maybe not even fully conscious, but a tactic nonetheless, to keep you unsteady.
Makes sense. Another big one from the material, walking on eggshells.
Oh, definitely. That constant low-level fear of their moods. Carefully picking your words, avoiding certain topics just to avoid setting them off.
You tell yourself you're just being considerate, trying to keep the peace.
But the sources frame it as emotional control. It's not about mutual respect. It's about you managing their potential reactions constantly. That's not healthy.
And then the guilt trips and blame shifting.
Masters of turning the tables, the sources say. You bring up something that hurt you, and suddenly they're the victim feeling attacked. You set a simple boundary.
And suddenly you don't love them enough, or you're being selfish, or you're the problem.
Yeah. And a key indicator from the research, are you constantly apologizing just to calm things down, even when you did nothing wrong? That suggests your guilt is being weaponized, used like a leash.
That's chilling. Then there's gaslighting. The sources call it psychological warfare.
It really is. It's denying your reality, saying things like, that never happened. You're imagining things. Or the ultimate dismissal, you're crazy.
The goal is to make you doubt your own perception, your own sanity.
Exactly. And terrifyingly, it often works. You start to trust their version of events more than your own memory, your own feelings. It cuts right to the core of your self-trust.
Okay, and one more cycle the sources detail. Love bombing followed by devaluation.
Ah, yes, the roller coaster. It starts with love bombing, that incredibly intense beginning.
Like they see right into your soul, flooding you with attention, praise, gifts, talking about forever almost immediately, making you feel unbelievably special.
You feel idealized, put on a pedestal.
Yeah.
It's intoxicating. But then the shift.
The devaluation phase. The affection vanishes. Criticism creeps in. They withdraw. You're left completely confused, hurt.
And desperately trying to get back to that amazing person from the beginning. Chasing the high.
This idealized devalue cycle, sometimes with discarding and then hoovering back, the sources say it's designed to keep you hooked.
Consciously or not, yes.
Easy
It creates instability and makes you dependent on their validation, which they give and take away unpredictably. Keeps you constantly off balance and craving the good times.
Which brings us to why it's just so incredibly hard to leave these situations even when you see the red flags. The sources talk about trauma bonding.
This is where psychology meets biology. These toxic up and down relationships create, as the sources put it, biochemical chaos in your brain.
Like actual chemical changes.
Yes, you get dopamine hits during the good times, the intense attention, the relief after conflict, the apologies, real highs.
And then cortisol floods during the bad times, the criticism, the fights, the fear, the withdrawal.
Exactly. Your system is swinging between intense pleasure or relief and intense stress. And the sources compare it to an addiction.
An addiction? How so?
You become bonded not by steady, healthy love, but by the intermittent relief from pain. When the tension breaks or they become nice again, it feels intensely rewarding because the pain stops. You're chasing that relief, those crumbs of affection.
Like gambling, the unpredictable reward makes it harder to stop.
Spot on. You stay for those brief highs, those moments that feel like the beginning, hoping that person will come back for good.
But the sources say those moments are just bait.
Essentially, yes. Bait to keep you hooked in the cycle. It's a powerful neurological and emotional bond, not a sign of weakness on your part. Your biology gets tangled up in it.
Okay, but it's not hopeless. The material offers clear pathways forward, starting with awareness and grounding.
Yes, coming back to your body. Manipulation disconnects you from your gut feelings, so grounding practices are key. Simple things, like the 5-4-3-2-1 technique.
Naming things you see, feel, hear, smell, taste.
Right, or even just splashing cold water on your face. Anything to pull you back into the present moment and reconnect with your physical sensations. Start listening to that internal alarm again.
And then boundary setting, which feels terrifying, the sources acknowledge.
Especially if you learned early on that boundaries weren't safe. but the material reframes it as self-respect in action.
Not about being aggressive, but starting small.
Exactly. Maybe just, I'm not comfortable with that, or let me think about it, or a simple no. And applying this even with family, the sources note, it's about protecting your own emotional well-being.
Therapy is also strongly recommended in the material, a specific kind.
Trauma-informed therapy is key. Someone who understands attachment, trauma's impact, and the nervous system. They help you see the patterns, process the grief.
Grief for the relationship you thought you had.
Yes, exactly. And crucially, rebuild trust in yourself, your feelings, your judgment, which manipulation undermines so badly. The sources mention EMDR, IFS, somatic experiencing as potentially helpful approaches.
And it all seems to come back to the body, the nervous system. Healing involves nervous system repair.
It really does. You need to help your system shift out of that constant state of high alert, fight, flight, freeze. Practices mentioned include specific breathing techniques, things that tone the vagus nerve like humming or cold exposure.
These help restore your capacity for calm, for feeling safe again.
Precisely. They rebuild your system's ability to regulate itself so you can experience calm, clarity, and eventually safe connection again.
The sources also tackled some common FAQs, which is helpful, like how do you know if it's manipulation or if you're just too sensitive?
Right. The key distinction the sources make is, if you're constantly doubting yourself, walking on eggshells, apologizing for normal feelings, that points to an unsafe dynamic, to manipulation. It's not about your sensitivity level. It's about the lack of safety to just be.
And why leaving is so hard again, that trauma bond, neurological and emotional hooks, not just about willpower.
Exactly. It's important to understand that.
What about intent? Does the manipulator mean to do it?
The sources say it can be complex. Sometimes it's learned patterns, unintentional repetition of past dynamics, but, and this is, critical intent doesn't cancel out the harm. The effect on you is what matters. The damage is real either way.
Is love bombing always a red flag?
Pretty much, according to the sources. If it feels like too much, too fast, too soon, that intense, overwhelming rush right at the start, healthy connection usually builds more slowly, more organically.
In the healing process, it's a journey, not a quick fix.
Definitely. It takes time. All those steps, awareness, grounding, boundaries, therapy, nervous system work, rebuilding self-trust, requires patience, self-compassion. But the consistent message is healing is absolutely possible.
This has been, wow, really clarifying. This deep dive really shows how tricky and damaging emotional manipulation is because it looks so much like love sometimes.
It truly does. It preys on our deepest needs for connection.
So if you're listening and any of this is resonating, please take this message from the sources to heart. You aren't weak. You aren't crazy. You're not broken.
You're surviving something incredibly difficult and often invisible.
And the really empowering final thought from this material is that you can reclaim your voice. You can rebuild those boundaries. You can unlearn the lies. You can come back home to yourself.
You are absolutely worthy of love that doesn't hurt you, love that doesn't confuse you or make you feel smaller. That's the fundamental truth here.
A really powerful note to end on. We hope walking through this material with us has brought some light, maybe some validation.
Understanding these dynamics is such a vital first step. And remember, healing is possible.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive podcast channel.